hand, Dr. Yemi Stembridge. He is the author of the book that I featured this month in the main idea. It is Culturally Responsive Education in the Classroom, an Equity Framework for Pedagogy. So you should all have the summary of this book and you can go out and get the book. Dr. Stembridge is an educational consultant. He specializes in equity-focused school improvement, and he works with both teachers and administrators to help design culturally responsive systems and learning experiences for students. So I really see him as the embodiment of the perfect marriage of theory and practice. He has his PhD and he's done research through NYU and Teachers College here in New York City, where I am. But equally important, or maybe more important, he has been a teacher of 7th through 11th graders in the Virginia public schools. And I've truly enjoyed getting to know him. I don't want to give away too much, but I would say have your pens ready to take notes, because he drops these little golden nuggets of knowledge that you will want to capture. In one of our meetings together, he said, and I quote, "Your reluctant learner is your spiritual teacher." Chew on that. It's your reluctant learner who is your spiritual teacher. I love that. Anyway, so why did I choose this book to focus on for the main idea? Well, like Dr. Stembridge, the book is that marriage of theory and practice. So if we really want to have equitable classrooms, we can't just read and discuss culturally responsive education. We also need to put strategies into play in our classrooms. But if we just jump to the strategies, we miss a lot of the ideas behind culturally responsive education. And what about all those moments that you haven't planned for? All those interactions in the hallways, or all those other times, or what you try with one group of students doesn't work with another. So really, to be effective, you need to have both the theory and the practice. And I found that this book brought both of these together. So for today, he's going to introduce the culturally responsive education model, the framework that he came up with. We are not going to sit here and share a laundry list of strategies. As he wrote in his book, I love this quote, and I love to quote authors in front of them. They can tell me if I got it wrong. If equity were a paint by numbers type of project, then a lot more people would be doing it brilliantly. So yes, equity is not a paint by numbers type of project. We're not going to go through a laundry list, of strategies. But if you stay till the end, Dr. Stembridge is going to share a link with 216 pages of strategies you can use in the classroom to support culturally responsive education. So without further ado, I bring you Dr. Stembridge.
Thank you very much, Jen. I appreciate you, and I've also considered it a pleasure getting to know you as well. I told Jen when she first reached out to me that I've been a fan of the main idea for years. You know, I'm so grateful to be able to spend this time with you all today, because human beings, as we know, are a tribal species. And I consider you the people who are deeply invested in delivering the kinds of opportunities to our children, all of our children, and especially our most vulnerable children. The people who are as concerned about that as I am are the people who I consider to be my tribe. So it is an honor to be able to hang out for the next hour with my tribe. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to interact with the book and some of the ideas in the book, but because we are teachers and educators, we're going to do this in a way that allows us to learn a little bit, allows us to actually engage with each other and our ideas, so that we're not just being talked at for an hour. So we're going to start with a thought experiment. I'm going to share my screen here. And I cleared my desktop for your well-being, because sometimes when people see my messy desktop, they judge me. And I always remind people, when you judge me, you are harming yourself. You're harming your own karma, not mine. See, I'm aware of that. All right, so we're going to start with what I call the GPS thought experiment. And this is written about in the book. And this may even be something in professional learning spaces that you might want to recreate. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with, you got to just think right now. I want you just to take about 20 seconds here just to think about where in the world are you most comfortable. Just think about that. And it's called a GPS thought experiment because the place has to have GPS coordinates. So where in the world are you most comfortable? Okay, a specific place that you could find, you could point to on a map. Where in the world are you most comfortable? We're going to put you in groups, And we're going to give you a couple of minutes to think about a couple of questions. Uh-oh, something just happened here. Sorry. We're going to put you in a group where you're going to think about a couple of questions. The questions you're going to think about are, well, let me give it some caveats. You're going to talk about where in the world are you most comfortable. Here are the caveats. It has to be a social environment, so there have to be other people there. It can't be, I always say, it can't be a secluded island in the South Pacific where you're all by yourself. There has to be other people there that you're interacting with, a social environment. And then I want you to think about, when you're naming your space in your group, what specifically is it about that environment that makes you comfortable? Okay, so where in the world are you most comfortable? We're just going to give you a couple of minutes to think about this in the group, and then we're going to come back. I'm going to ask a few people to share what they came up with.
So I'm putting everybody in rooms of 3 people each. Please share. You've got 6 minutes. Keep an eye on the clock. And if you haven't been in one of these rooms before, you just click the button that says join the breakout room. All right, if you're there and you have a moment to click on the breakout room, join. People are waiting for you. Kelly, you there?
I got kicked out somehow.
You got kicked out. All right, let me see.
I was in something with a 3. But I can wait. I can hang out too until people are done.
I will.
There it is.
There you go.
Thanks.
All right, people should have their links now. If anyone's having trouble, let me know. Hi, Mia. Were you able to click the breakout room? Rainey, Thomas, anyone? Welcome back. Hey, Maria. I didn't see you before. How are you?
Good, how are you?
You should share your link with your great webinar in the chat box. Great resource. Great, getting people back. Bridie, you and I are spending lots of time these days.
I know, how have you been?
I'm good. Super hot in New York City, but good.
Yeah, I hear you. Nice to see you.
Great. Do we have everybody back? It's a large group. They're getting there. Sorry, still a few people.
Can you tell me why my picture's not showing up?
Sometimes there's a little button where your video on the bottom left where it says stop video. You can try that.
Bottom left. Start. Oh, okay.
Right next to
Got
you.
it. Got it. Oh, there's my forehead. So dark. Okay.
I know, hard to see everything. Technology.
Got to put that light in front of you. Your light source has to be facing you. Some of the things we got to learn now is we're putting ourselves on video more.
Terrible at that stuff.
Yeah, that's something I can't fix in here.
Yeah.
Or you have to get rid of your lights.
Got those makeup YouTuber lights.
All right. I think we got everybody, Yami.
Okay. So I'm going to get a couple of volunteers, if you will. I was chatting with Katie. So Katie, I want to ask you if you would, and then I want to also get 2 other volunteers to share their answer. But Katie, will you tell me where in the world are you most comfortable?
I said I am most comfortable at 1296 Plaza Avenue, Southwest Atlanta, Georgia, which is my house. And I am most comfortable there because it is my home, where I live with my husband and my dog. The 2 people, well, I guess my dog's not a person, but the 2 people I'm most comfortable with in the world. And I get to be myself entirely. And it is decorated to represent me. So it is like a manifestation of myself.
Okay. Okay. Anything else you would add?
That when I am there, I am comfortable regardless of what emotion I'm experiencing, no matter whether I'm happy or I'm sad or I'm angry, I still feel comfortable, even if it's not a positive experience that I'm having in that location.
Okay. Okay. Can I get a couple of other volunteers, please? Who else would like to share? Where in the world are you most comfortable?
I can share.
Please.
Hi, everybody. I am most comfortable here in Baltimore, Maryland. I was sharing with my group that I was born in New Jersey and lived there for a while. Wouldn't go back to live, no offense. I lived in Newark, New Jersey. If anybody knows anything about Newark, you probably understand why I wouldn't go back. And then I lived down in Georgia, in the metro area. I lived in East Point, which is basically in the Atlanta area, through high school, first year of college, and I was ready to go. Little too much dirty South for me. So I did my time down there, and I came here for school at Morgan State University, and it's a great, happy medium. I live here in Baltimore. My street is kind of suburban, but you go up the street, you're back in the city. You go for a little drive, you're at the farm. So there's so many different types of places here. I really like it here. And yeah, Baltimore.
Is it Natira? Is that how I pronounce your name?
Natira.
Natira. So Natira, give me one specific place in Baltimore where I could come find you and see you in your most comfortable glory.
In my home.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let me get one more person, please. Where in the world are you most, Stephanie?
I could say something.
Where in the world are you most comfortable?
So I used to live in Japan for 5 years, and I don't speak Japanese that well. So I was always nervous out in public a lot of the time. So there was one cafe on my island where I knew the owner of the cafe. I knew enough Japanese that I could always order from there. He did some familiar things, like he had clam chowder. I never saw that anywhere else in Japan. So I could go in, I could sit at the table. He knew my order. And it was just very much like I could just sit there, and I was always out of place just because if you're in Japan, pretty much everyone around you is going to be Japanese. But I always felt like I could be comfortable there, and that, you know, even if there was some confusion, we could work it out. And so that was someplace that I was very comfortable there.
Okay, thank you. So, Katie, Natira, Stephanie, I'm going to ask you all a follow-up question. Okay, so you got to think about this, and you got to give me somewhat of a brief response. But here's my next question for you. My next question is, what would have to change about that environment in order for you to feel less comfortable? So you're locating yourself in that, you're standing on those GPS points. What would have to change about that environment for you to feel less comfortable? Katie, what do you think? What would have to change?
First of all, I think if you remove my husband and my dog and you put in a different person and a different dog, I would probably be way more uncomfortable. And then second of all, my house is like is very decorated with, like, I mean, not really decor, but just like things that represent me and my family. So I think if you took all of that out, I would feel like you just plopped me in an Airbnb, and then it's not my space anymore. It's just a space that I paid to exist.
Okay. Natira, what would have to change?
I would say if people that I don't know were to also move in, even if the people I know stay here, then I would kind of feel like I have to kind of tiptoe around and be very uncomfortable. Also, if it's just really, really dirty environment, I just can't do dirty. So if it's very just dirty, uncomfortable environment, I can't deal with that.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie, what would have to change about your environment for you to feel less comfortable?
I can imagine if the menu changed, because I knew the old menu, if the store changed hands, or if suddenly I didn't know any of the waiters and they weren't comfortable with me, then I wouldn't be comfortable, because some places people got freaked out when I walked in because they're like, oh, she doesn't speak Japanese. So I would be really uncomfortable if suddenly the waiters were looking at me like, oh, I don't want to talk to her. So I can imagine it would be pretty different then.
Okay, all right. And one more follow-up for the three of you. When you're in that space, standing on your GPS coordinates, what parts of your identity, your sense of self, the way you imagine who you are in that moment, what parts of your identity is most salient to you in that comfortable environment? We'll start again with you, Katie. What do you think?
I guess I just in that space, I feel like I am my truest version of myself and my most honest version of myself, and that I would say or do without like any inhibition what my natural instinct is, instead of like having a social barrier where I may like pause and think, is this how I need to respond? Is this how I'm expected to respond? Is this the type of engagement that I want to be in? There's no question about how I would react in a situation in that space.
Okay, okay. I would also just add, I'm coming to you next, Natira. It sounds like your identity as a wife is particularly salient to you in your space. And it sounds like your identity as a dog mom is particularly salient to you. You're always a wife and you're always a dog mom wherever you are, but in that space, that part of your identity seems to be really resonating and ringing through.
Yes, I would agree. And more than a wife, I would say a partner. Cool. Like a companion to both my husband, an equal companion to my husband, and my dog is kind of just like our little pal that hangs around.
Gotcha.
Dr. Stembridge, I'm going to give just a little warning. We're a little bit over. Keep your eye on the time. That's all. However you want to do it.
Natira, what do you think? What parts of your identity are most especially salient to you in your comfortable place?
I like to sing. But I sing about everything. I sing to my kids about cleaning the kitchen. You know, I sing about going shopping. You know, and I can be pretty silly. So that silliness can be misinterpreted in other places where people kind of question your competency when you're being silly. But you know, you know, I have a degree and I do what I do, but I can be silly, and that comes out in my home a lot.
Okay, all right, because like, I appreciate your contribution to this conversation, but it would not be appropriate for you to start singing right now. That, as much as that's an honest, authentic part of your being, that's not the way you are expressing your engagement here.
Right.
Okay, all right. Stephanie, what part of your cultural identity is salient at your cafe?
At that cafe, I do still feel like anywhere you go in Japan, if you are foreign, you feel foreign. But there, I still felt like a foreigner, but I felt like I was part of the community in a way. So I was aware that they were showing a lot of kindness to someone who was foreign. So I still felt it, but that it was more welcomed. It was like a friendly treatment of that.
Gotcha. So I am going to kind of push us forward here. Here's the point that I like to make with the GPS thought experiment. Those spaces, wherever you name those spaces, if there was a particular GPS point, if we can find you there, in those spaces, your answers, wherever you are, generally are, you know, you're comfortable there because you feel safe. You feel less judged. You can take more risks in what you're saying because you don't think that you will be, you know, determined to be a bad person based on one utterance. You know the rules. You know who to ask for and how to ask for help. Let me tell you something. In these spaces where you're most comfortable, you are funnier in those spaces than you are in spaces where you don't have that kind of familiarity, right? These are the spaces where you can start a joke and then somebody's like, oh, I know exactly what I was thinking the same thing. Have you ever had someone who says to you, like, they think that you also get their joke and they're like, oh, you know what that reminds me of? And you're like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about right now. That's super awkward. You know how to injure others. You know how to protect others. You know the context. You know the histories. You know the storylines. You know how to express reverence, how to express respect, how to express care. You know the sacred cows. So I use this thought experiment to help people start to gain a certain visceral idea of what it is I mean by culturally responsive. In these spaces are culturally responsive to you. These are the spaces in which you can show up as your most authentic self. And I would suggest, given what we know from the cognitive science around how the brain incorporates new information, you are smarter in these spaces than you would be otherwise. If for no other reason, you are devoting less cognitive load to interpreting the meaning of the social space. And one of the things that I could talk about when I talk about culture is the rules that we use to govern interactions in social spaces. That's why for Natara, it might be entirely appropriate. There's some spaces where it would be inappropriate for her not to sing. If she didn't sing, that would be an indicator of disengagement. But in this space, it would be inappropriate for her to sing. Even if that was an honest expression of her engagement, that would be, it would go against the rules of the cultural space. So our goal in creating culturally responsive learning experiences and spaces for our kids is essentially to try to create a space where they can feel the way we feel in our most comfortable place in the world, because we know if we can create those kinds of circumstances, they can show up as their most brilliant, most engaged selves. I'm going to move here through some slides. I define culturally responsive education. I want to make sure I'm defining this. This is the definition that I had worked on when I was at New York University with my colleagues. We said that CRE, culturally responsive education, starts with cultural competence. Now here's the thing, I work in some schools where there are 25 different racial, ethnic, linguistic backgrounds represented in one classroom. And in that kind of diverse space where my goal is to be inclusive, it is not, I think, reasonable to expect that any one human being will be an expert in all of the cultural competencies represented amongst the students. But what we have to do is we have to try to create learning experiences where our students can leverage their cultural competencies in the interest of learning. We want to make sure that what we are setting up for our students in the ways of learning experiences allows them to draw on their backgrounds, their fluencies, their ways of knowing, so that they can feel competent, engaged, connected to the learning environment. So the goal here is as much to learn about our students' cultural competencies as to create learning experiences where they can show us those cultural competencies, because that's how we become expert. Beyond the cultural competencies, centering that, knowing that that's always going to be a central part to how kids are perceiving the space. Then I say that there are just these culturally responsive habits of thinking. I write about these in the book a little bit. This is about the willingness to think about your thinking, to see teaching and learning as a journey, not a destination.
Excuse me, Dr. Stembridge. I don't think you shared your screen yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at it.
That's okay. That's okay. We're
Sorry
listening.
about that, folks.
We're listening. But for those who need the visual anchor, I know you spent some time putting the slides together.
Yeah, my bad. Sorry. So you have the cultural competence in that center, and then beyond that, you have your culturally responsive habits of thinking. That means you also didn't see my last slide that I was showing that I was speaking from. I'm sorry about that. And then beyond that, you have what Gloria Ladson-Billings, who I think of as one of the matriarchs of culturally responsive education. You just have just good practices. Now, here's what I think is really an important observation, something that I've learned from being in classrooms. Most of what I've learned about culturally responsive education, I've learned in schools from teachers. In my view, we are not looking, I'm going to talk about Black people because I'm Black. We are not looking for a Black boy culturally responsive teaching strategy toolkit. There are not, in my view, strategies that are specific to work with all boys who have Black skin. And yet, if I have deeply steeped myself in learning about the cultural competencies of the community that I am serving, and I have practiced and exercised my culturally responsive mindset, my habits of thinking, then I will be better able to draw from my toolkit to pick the practices that are going to work with this particular group of Black boys in front of me. And as a teacher, one of the things that I learned was that some of the strategies that work with my Black boys one year aren't necessarily going to be the same exact strategies that'll work with my Black boys the next year. But if I employ my mindset, and if I'm humble to the craft, I will be able to find in my toolkit those strategies, those techniques, those opportunities that are likely to resonate with my kiddos. My definition of culturally responsive education in the book is, I think of culturally responsive education as a mental model useful for identifying themes and tools of practice for closing opportunity gaps. The CRE mental model gives conceptual context for policies and practices that focus on equity without marginalizing some students relative to others. It actively enlists the awareness of culture, race, ethnicity, gender, ability, and other social identity markers that shape the perceptions of educational opportunities. Now, a couple of key words in here that I want us to keep in mind: perceptions. Let's start with the back end of the definition. You are not culturally responsive because you have proclaimed yourself to be. The judge and jury of your responsiveness are the persons to whom you hope to be perceived as responsive. And so we've got to make sure that we're centering our students, their identities, their experiences, their interpretation of their experiences as we are deciding what it means to be culturally responsive with our kiddos. Perceptions, one of the key researchers that I draw on in the book when I define responsiveness is a social psychologist out of University of Rochester. His name is Harry Rice. I encourage you to look him up, R-E-I-S. And he talks about responsiveness being a function of perceived understanding, perceived validation, perceived care. And so our instruction, our work with students can be said to be responsive when our students perceive through it that they are understood. You get me, that they perceive through it that they are validated. You confirm that I have skills and abilities and gifts to contribute to this community. Our teaching and our learning is perceived as responsive, or is culturally responsive when our kiddos perceive it as caring. You have a vested interest in my well-being. And so when I'm talking about culturally responsive education as a pedagogy for closing equity gaps, I'm saying that when we are good about equity, equity provides all of our students a fair and meaningful opportunity to engage in rigorous learning experiences by drawing on their identities and their cultural fluencies and their backgrounds in order to show their competence. in the about 12 years or so that I've been working out with teachers, and again, I'm on the carpet. I told Jen yesterday, before the whole world changed, I was regularly sitting on carpets, crisscross applesauce, trying to figure this stuff out. My goal in writing this book was not to, describe ideas that I have that exist in the abstract. These are things that I've been learning side by side with teachers for more than a decade. And I can tell you that what you're looking at right now is a visual representation of what I call the mental model for culturally responsive education. That top graphic, I think of culturally responsive education as existing at the intersection of equity and pedagogy. Equity these are the questions that we ask about whom we are serving, the needs, the backgrounds, the identities, the interests of the students in the communities that we are tasked to serve. Pedagogy are the questions that we ask about how we teach. So I think of culturally responsive education as existing in that intersection, the questions about whom and the questions about how. What I have found and what I write about in the book, on the right side here of the graphic, those are the 6 themes of CRE. These are ideas that on the face of it, we are familiar with. One of the suggestions that I might make if you're bringing this book back to your school is set up themes, and your theme teams can be groups that just are doing a deep dive in the themes, and then they're responsible for bringing those themes back to the rest of your staff. And I operationalize these themes through questions. So these 6 big ideas, and I'll just give you even a little bit more background. They initially began as I was just trying to chunk out big ideas for professional development when I only had an hour, 90 minutes to talk to groups of teachers at a time. So I think of that as the vocabulary of culturally responsive education. If these are the big ideas that we share an understanding about, and we are using this language, meaning the same things, we're probably talking about the right stuff in the right way. And on the left, these are the planning questions that I have found over about a decade, that if we ask these questions and we answer them thoughtfully, then we are more likely to create experiences that will engage our kiddos in rigorous thinking. So Jen, I know we're kind of over time here. I can go into talking more about cultural identity. What do you think is the best way to go here?
Want to ask if there are any questions first, and then?
Sure, I think that's fine.
If people want to share questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask Dr. Stembridge, I know it's a lot, the model is a lot, especially if you haven't read the book or the book summary. And I can also share. A couple of people sent in questions ahead of time. And so while people are thinking of their questions, one question that kept coming up is where to start with all of this work. I liked your idea of the jigsaw, maybe dividing up staff and having them each take one of these themes, read the section of the book, come back and share. But it's a lot, right? These 6 planning questions, the 5 planning questions, the 6 themes. So a school that wants to get started, what do you suggest for the beginning?
So, what I would start with is first, we have to really anchor ourselves in this understanding that we are not going to solve adaptive problems with technical fixes. I was talking to Jen beforehand about that classic article. Google it if you haven't seen it. The Work of Leadership by Heifetz and Laurie. The Work of Leadership. It talks about the difference between technical problems and adaptive problems. Also one of my favorite writers is Atul Gawande. And so I read this book years ago, The Checklist Manifesto. And in this book, he talks about the difference between simple tasks, compound tasks, and complex tasks. So the first thing that you have to really think about, and I know this is challenging because we have so much happening so soon, is we are not merely looking to port the classroom practices from pre-COVID into a post-COVID virtual world, because frankly, there wasn't enough culturally responsive teaching happening before coronavirus. We weren't hit. If we were nailing equity before coronavirus, then I would say, yeah, just do exactly what you were doing before, but do it in a virtual model. So what we really have to do is we have to recenter ourselves in the purpose of our teaching and learning, what it is we are trying most to accomplish. And so, you know, what I would say first is you really got to make sure that you are challenging people to think think about what they're bringing forward as a recommitment to engagement, as a recommitment to celebrating and including the currencies, the backgrounds that are represented in our students. I want to show you another slide that I had here. This is a model that I like for talking about what we mean by cultural identity. And when we think about ourselves as cultural beings, we, you know, we're a composite of different parts of ourselves. Your cultural identity is a function of race and ethnicity. It's also a function of your socioeconomic status, your religious background, nationality, language background, how you identify in terms of gender. Your sense of self and the way you make decisions about how to contribute draws from each parts of yourself. So in each of these boxes, there are fluencies, ways of communicating. There are competencies, skill sets, how to do things. There are ways of knowing, understandings about how you accrue knowledge and information. So one of the things that I would be thinking about specific to a theme like cultural identity is, as we are teaching now in hybrid and virtual models, how are we giving students an opportunity to bridge their academic identities with their social and cultural identities? Because here's the truth of the matter. If you don't think about that deeply, then you are advantaging people who come from similar cultural indoctrinations as you do. When you don't think deeply about how culture is informing the way people act and show up in a specific social space, then you are just moving on cultural autopilot. You're just assuming that everyone is bringing the same cultural lens to the situation as you are. So when you think about cultural identity, I always tell teachers this: the most important part of your work in this theme of cultural identity is not becoming an expert in the identities of your students, it's becoming super clear and an expert in your own cultural lens. How are you inclined to read an environment? How are you inclined to make judgments about what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, what's right, what's wrong? You know, if I go back to my "Where in the World Are You Most Comfortable?" I wrote about in the book about Yankee Stadium and about me and my kid going to Yankee Stadium and the ways we're able to have some of our most important and intimate conversations in Yankee Stadium, because that's a place where his identity as a son is super affirmed and clear to him, and my identity as a dad is super affirmed and clear to me. And, you know, like, for those of you who are also, you know, Yankees fans, if you know, if this was the old days, we can go to a stadium and, you know, Gary Sanchez gets a big hit, we stand up and cheer. You shout, you might, you know, I mean, old times, you know, before coronavirus, you might give someone sitting next to you a high five. You would never do that now, you know, not unless you had like a hazmat suit on. But you physically, boisterously celebrate the moment. If I said something here today that really resonated for you and you erupted in a cheer, you would be insane, right? Like, that would be wholly inappropriate. So we're always reading the environment to make sense of how can I affirm that I am and confirm that I am engaged. So I would say, you know, the first thing is you're thinking about, as we're teaching, not just like superficial content coverage, big ideas that matter. And this goes back to the first question in the in the planning questions. When I ask, what do you want your students to understand? I'm going to leave you with a tool that you can help to unpack this. This is not something that can be, your answer to this question should be an understanding, a concept, an idea that your students will still be able to recall 15 years from now. It's a big idea on which other big ideas are constructed. When you are teaching big ideas, that gives more cultural landscape, more cultural on-ramps for your kids to say. We always want our kids thinking, oh, that reminds me of, oh, that makes me think of, oh, that's kind of like. When our kids are doing that, what they are doing is they are marrying parts of their background, their fluencies, their identity with the meaningful big ideas that we want them to know. That ain't gonna happen with a worksheet. It doesn't happen with rote, thoughtless, busy work, or time on task or time on screen, which I know is gonna be one of the big challenges here as we're transitioning for this next year, a year that's going to be the most important year for millions and millions of kids in this country. So when you're thinking about what that big understanding is, then you can also think in terms of how can our kids access that big understanding through the fluencies, the competencies, the skills that they have in these different parts of their cultural identities, these different parts of their selves. Jen, I'm scrolling through my slides here.
I know, right at time. We probably have time either for your Starbucks analogy or, you know, as you were talking about merging kids' social and cultural identities with their academic identity. I thought about the Family Narrative Project. I don't know that we have time for that video, but I would say either you could describe the Starbucks or describe the video. The video, we have 10 minutes. It's too long.
I think so. Okay.
You feel free to share what you think is best, and people should feel comfortable adding questions as well.
Okay, I'd really love to be able to spend the last few minutes engaging with questions. I'm just coming back here because I'm just giving you, I wrote a whole book about this, right? Which means that I shouldn't be able to summarize it really easily in, 55 minutes of conversation.
Well, one question that somebody asked ahead of time that perhaps you could weave in as you're finishing, somebody wrote, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in schools after applying your concepts? I thought that was a really powerful question. So you see if it fits in your remaining 10 minutes.
I would like to answer that question. And I think I want to call on my colleague, Vicki, also to share, because I've worked closely with Vicki and she's seen a lot of the schools. We've worked together in a lot of the schools where we've really tried to push this conversation. As I thought about that question, my most honest answer was, it's interesting because I've actually not lost, but I've had some relationships with principals that were damaged a little bit when they celebrated to me their own reasons why they think and how they think the work has helped the school. And what they go to is they go to those godforsaken evil test scores. High stakes standardized testing are a tool of white supremacy. If you, and here's how I could prove it. The most reliable indicator of how a student is going to perform on a high stakes standardized test is their zip code. And we live in a country with a history of redlining and restrictive covenants. The government has actively participated in creating a segregated society. And so those tests, and I've never met a teacher who said, you know what, I can't wait to get my results back from my students' high stakes standardized testing because it's gonna really help me to improve my pedagogy for next year. The testing is, I think, at best, this be my most gracious self, at best, it's a proximal indicator of effective teaching and learning. Teachers, I say this all the time, if you want to improve your test scores, go teach at a predominantly white and wealthy school. You don't have to change your test, your teaching at all, your tests will improve. What I think that the test scores are a proximal, indirect result of an improved environment in terms of relationships and rigor. What I've seen in the schools where this work has really taken root and I feel a difference is kids feel seen, kids feel valued, kids feel respected, they feel heard, and kids are exposed to more rigorous learning experiences. We got to go high rigor. Whenever I see a kid or a classroom full of kids where they are disengaged and behaving badly, I say we got to ask them more rigorous questions. We have to put more rigorous thinking in front of them. Now, the problem is a lot of us don't really understand what we mean by rigor. I had been teacher of the year in my school and didn't really know what rigor meant. I could kind of define it in a sentence. I could use language enough to keep you off of me, but I didn't really know how to apply it in the most meaningful ways. So what I have seen in the schools where the work has really taken root is more creative planning for instruction, more themed instruction, where students are being brought to understandings in more narrative form. They're able to connect ideas in ways that that make the learning more fun, more engaging, but cognitively more likely, because they are setting up these neural pathways and neural networks that are much more durable than when we're asking them just to memorize for the sake of regurgitation in their working memory. So some of what I've seen is just, what I have definitely noticed is that some of the schools, I was going to show you a film today, but I'm going to give you a link so you can watch the film yourself. One of the schools, for me, it was like my happy place. It was a place where I always knew that I could go and see kids really invested in their learning. And I felt like the teachers who were really, really adopting the mental model, they showed me a lot of love, because I think it helped to make teaching a more pleasant and enjoyable experience for them than it had been before. Well, Vicki, can I get you to unmute your mic? And can you also share maybe some of what you've seen and some of what you do in your coaching?
Sure. So I'm a CRE coach out in Colorado. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I was actually sharing this with Dr. Sembridge the other day, because we've worked together for many years. And, I've noticed that for a lot of the teachers right now, there's that feeling of overwhelmness. They're just overwhelmed about, like, how do I get this stuff online? And we may be hybrid, we may be remote, we may start in person, but then go remote or hybrid. And there's all of this happening. And so I'm able to sit down with them, and especially as we go through this work, and really plan out at that larger conceptual level of what it is they're going to teach in these units or these project-based learning experiences that they're having. And so it's kind of interesting, because I was sharing that the other day I was working with the 6th grade social studies team, and these teachers that approached me, they're like, yeah, we want to teach about, some of our indigenous history in Colorado, and we want to, talk about the Sand Creek Massacre. And I was like, okay, let's, just kind of let's talk a little bit about what this is. And what we ended up doing through this kind of design studio experience is planning out this whole unit around like what's in a name, right? So we were talking about how as we started about the indigenous heritage in Colorado, we're like, wow, even in our district, we have schools that are named like Cherokee Trail and Smoky Hill and all of these different, and what does that mean? Like, what's the difference between honoring, commemorating, remembering, right? So we started to build up and out from the standards. And the reason that that's super important, and when I think about this work, I think it's so key that oftentimes we feel this pressure to go through and like checklist through the standards, right? And so they're sort of not wrapped around something larger and meaningful for kids to really engage in. And so what we were able to do is kind of wrap it around this concept of what's in a name. And then in order to do this unit, they're going to have to research and write and talk to people, and whether that's virtually or in their little Zoom groups. But we ended up building out like this learning experience that can actually be virtual or in person, or however we're going to end up doing it. And what I always tell teachers is like, yeah, we have standards, but those can shake out in real meaningful ways if we can get to that larger conceptual understanding of what is it that we really want kids to remember 15 years from now. And I think what's going to be cool about this experience is that kids will be able to kind of investigate things on their own. So whatever it is they're interested in, sport team, if they're looking at what's happening with mascots and sporting teams, if they're looking at something more local, personal, local media conversations that they're having with people in their homes, because there's tons of knowledge at home, right? I think we tend to think, oh, kids are home, they're not learning. Some of my best learning has come from home, right? So we're able to leverage all that in real meaningful ways for kids. And I feel like the CRE work has really nicely transitioned to whatever platform, because it's really not about the activity, right? It's about the designing the learning experience for kids, getting to that larger conceptual understanding. So we're able to flow back and forth without some of the issues around if you're just kind of trying to go through and cover material.
Thank you, Vicki, for sharing that. I think that Dr. Stenbridge said to me, and maybe you'll find when you look at these 216 pages of activities that teachers often come to him and say, we already do this, we already do this. And so you're like, what's in a name? Oh yeah, I've done that project. But I think it's when you come to it with this larger CRE understanding that you implement it differently. And one of the things we wanted to show you was this project that Dr. Stenbridge worked on with a 4th grade class, this family narrative project, because it's also a great way to consider starting the school year in a distance learning situation. Do you want me as an outsider to explain what I got from it, or do you want to explain, Dr.
Please do.
So, so he has these videos and you can watch them, and it's an assignment I think we've all seen, right? Have students go home and interview their families, right? So I'm watching this video and I'm like, yeah, me, I've done that. Yeah, just like he said the teachers do. But what comes out of this project is that it includes a number of the elements of CRE. It's done in a deeper way. So the attention to the rigor, not just go home and interview, but the attention to the writing and the reading, raising the rigor. Kids feel respected when there's rigor in the assignment. The attention to relationships, the relationships that the students talked about in the video that they built with their family members. They felt badly they didn't get to interview enough family members, but really the attention to the relationship, not as a byproduct, but as an actual goal of the assignment. And then one of the teachers saying that when she does it again, she's actually going to do the assignment herself and interview her own family members and share that with the class. And we're all seeing in distance learning that kids are more curious, right? They see our books and our dogs and everything behind us. So what a great project to start the year with, but not just as like a checkbox that we did it, but to look at the elements that Dr. Stenbridge introduced, the vulnerability, the relationships, the engagement, really looking to those to do the project in a way that is truly culturally responsive.
Yeah, and the content, the kind of hardcore content was theme. And as a high school English teacher, I can tell you, I don't know if there are any other high school English teachers in the room, I had very few students who got to me with a rigorous understanding of theme. And here's the thing, and here's how I connect this to equity. It is almost impossible to justify the effort that it takes to read through a dense, challenging text if you are reading for plot as opposed to theme. Theme is that which makes a piece of literature human. It's what allows me in some way to place myself in the text so that I can create the meaning for me in the text that no other reader is able to do. You can't individualize plot in the same way that you can theme. And what we realized, and we were going after with this team of 4th grade teachers, as you can see about in the Family Narrative Project, is what happens when we bring this theme, right? This idea, this concept of theme to life for our kiddos. So I invite you to take a look at that. And there's a whole host of resources also that you can add on and build to that. I will say this, if you watch that Family Narrative Project and you try to do it exactly the same way that we try to do it, you miss the point. The point is to be responsive to your students. This is, this is chess, not checkers, right? Like, this is not like making a simple pound cake. This is about figuring out how do we make this an experience that truly resonates for our kids, something that becomes a part of them. And then there's also here the super toolkit that I'm happy to share with you. It's not, original work of my own. I'm just a curator of these different strategies in the super toolkit. There's a standalone PDF document called the super toolkit. The only thing that I ask is when you refer to it, please refer to it as the super toolkit, because it's not just a regular toolkit, it's a super toolkit. And it is actually, Jen, sorry to correct you, it's 266 pages of pedagogical joy and goodness. 216 pages specifically of strategies, but 52 pages of lead up that puts the strategies in context. All of which I also tell people, if you're not bringing your culturally responsive / equity mindset, these are 266 pages of ways that you can fail spectacularly with your kids.
All right, so we're just at 2 o'clock. And I want to be sensitive to time. So yes, we're leaving you, if you would like, for homework to read the book, read the summary, take a look at these videos. You can type in this bit.ly and that's where you'll get the resource. I'm going to email it to everyone, as well as a recording of this. And if you want to get in touch with Dr. Stembridge, he does coaching, consulting, and you can reach him here at his email address. Anything last as we part?
No, I would just say, you know, I'm sending out love and light to all my tribes, you know, people, teachers, folks trying to do right by their kids and also trying to manage, you know, very difficult life circumstances for themselves. This is going to be the most challenging year of your career, likely. And, you know, I just want to send you, you know, support and encouragement and inspiration. And I want to remind you of something that you already know. Your students, all of your students, and especially your most vulnerable students, are counting on you to bring your best self forward every single day. So good luck, stay up, and go Yankees. Let's get this championship.
And thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be here, to put this together, to serve as a resource. We're all here trying to help each other during these difficult times, and you're doing your part by helping and supporting all of us. So thank you, and thanks for the wonderful resource. The book is fantastic. I recommend it. And thanks to everyone. Good luck, and reach out when you need anything.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.